whenever you want.
So you've said good evening, so I don't have to repeat that. Because I would prefer you to talk for part of this session rather than just me doing all the talking, we would like to start with connecting you to each other and ask you to, as we will direct you to the breakout rooms, to talk to two other people, if it works okay, and introduce yourselves to each other, as well as have a quick conversation about what it is that you would like to get out of today's talk. So we will not be asking for any feedback. Don't worry about that. Just speak to each other and just tell that to one another. So Tom, can we get people into the breakout rooms? I am. Some of you know me for your sins. For those of you who don't, excellent. Well, that clarifies it. And now I can see everything I need to see. So an independent coach, consultant, trainer, but also very importantly, and why I'm here today, I'm also founding partner of Beliminal. I have been around for a while. Probably not something I want to talk about too much. I worked in a number of different industries, and I have been for the last few years focusing on organizational agility. So yes, loving working with teams and always excited about working with teams, but also looking at the broader context, which took me to outcomes and trying to understand how they fit into all of this, what they are, and how we can make them useful. And that really is one of the main points I usually mention when I talk about what I am and what I'm not. I'd like to think that I'm agnostic and pragmatic, and therefore not at all particularly keen on being right or avoiding to be wrong, but much more interested in being useful. So that's what I want to talk. That's all I want to say about myself. When it comes about my certifications, the one I'm the keenest about and most proud about is that I'm a certified It Depends practitioner. And that will come handy during this talk at least once, and I may explain it later. So, talking about outcomes. We talk about outcomes, but most of our language, despite of the fact that the Agile Manifesto was almost 20 years ago, most of our language is still the language of outputs. So how do I best illustrate that? Well, if we look at the traditional iron triangle of project management, or even the Agile iron triangle, we talk about scope. And scope is all about what it is that we will deliver and what we will do to deliver it. So it's really outputs. And when we talk about it, we talk about work breakdown structure, we talk about product breakdown structure, still very much outputs, the stuff that we produce. It's really all about stuff. And then we go to Agile Manifesto, and Agile Manifesto talks about working software. And then some clever people change it to say working solutions, and it's still stuff. And Scrum talks about product backlog, talks about product increments, it talks about velocity. Kanban talks about work in progress, cycle time, lead time, throughput. None of this is outcomes. Yes? Sorry, did somebody want to say something or ask something?
No.
No? So please feel free. That's something that I should have said. It's probably going to be more difficult in this way of doing things, doing it online. But if you do have a burning question, I'm not checking the chat because I can't, my brain's not capable of multi-threading.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
thanks.
just ask a question. But if not, we just continue. So this is the language that we have been using, and even the creators of Scrum, or one of the creators of Scrum, has published a book a while ago called Scrum: The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. So it's all about work, and it's all about doing more work. And when I worked in one of the organizations fairly recently, the chief operating officer made the following statement. He said, "We just want more stuff more quickly." Is it really about that? And what happened to the Agile Manifesto principle of simplicity that talks about minimizing or maximizing the amount of stuff not done, therefore minimizing the amount of things that we do? So which way is it around? Or which way around is it? And the quote I really like, which is related to this, is from a chap called John Cutler, who some of you may be familiar with. And he talks about something he calls feature factory. So sometimes we focus on what we're doing, we focus on the busy work, we focus on the stuff that we're creating, and it almost feels like we're in the factory cranking out features, cranking out stuff. And he gives a bunch of examples of what it is like and what are the indications, signs that you might be working in a feature factory. I've gone through them and I've kind of summarized them in my own way. And these are some of them. I'm not intending to go through them, but I'll just keep them there for a few seconds for you to have a quick look through them. And then if you want to comment on any of them, please feel free before we move on.
Sorry, Dragan, just a quick question from Corrado.
Is it possible just to be a bit louder?
A quick question.
Yeah.
Are you going to share the deck later?
Tom, we will, won't we?
So we're recording this session, so we hope to get the recording up, which will include the deck. And then if Dragan wants to share it on SlideShare, he can do it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we can organize that, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Dragan.
May all the questions be as easy as that one. Okay? So my point is, while we are Agilists and we have been working in the Agile space for however many years, in my case far too many, and there's 20 years coming to when the Agile Manifesto came out, our language hasn't changed or hasn't changed much. So the next thing I would like to move to is, okay, well, that's outputs. But what about outcomes, and how do these two compare to one another? And this is the exciting bit, because I've no idea how this will work, and we'll find out soon enough. So I will stop sharing this and go to Mentimeter. So if, Tom, will you be kind enough to share in the chat the link? But if you have your phones handy, or if you want to do it on your laptops or whatever you are following on, if you go to menti.com and type in the 6 figures code 208460, you should have the first question on your screen. And the first question is, what is the difference between an output and an outcome? And if you could type up your answer in, well, fewer words are better than many, and submit, we should start seeing them popping up on the screen. Okay, thank you. See how my subliminal embedding stuff, the word stuff in your minds worked. Quite a few are mentioning stuff. A few interesting ones. Outcome can be anything. We could probably spend the next hour talking about some of these. Any more? See, the example with ATM is an interesting one, and it would be useful maybe to come back to that at some point once we've talked a bit more about this, to say, okay, how does this apply to ATM and cash? Because you wouldn't be surprised to hear, especially those of you who know me, that I have a different view on how the ATM may be looked at. Somebody at the very beginning said they are the same thing. Would you care to elaborate? No? Okay. In which case, thank you. Any of you spotted anything that you want to highlight or agree with strongly or disagree with strongly? I'll just scroll through them.
I think, Dragan, the one right at the bottom on the right-hand side, output equals work minus value.
That one? Yellow one?
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah?
I think I was thinking that's why I was saying something more output's like just a deliverable, an outcome, something useful.
Okay, is this yours?
No, I wish it was. I'm not that smart, but I wish it was. But I like it.
It's interesting because, especially because I'm not sure what it means. I'm not sure about work minus value minus outcomes.
So
Does it perhaps mean output equals work without value, whereas outcomes are the work that give value?
Yeah.
So it's not mine, I'm only guessing. It's sort of what I meant when I said with lots of typos that outcome is stuff and, sorry, output is stuff and outcome is the customer's experience.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So if we go back to my presentation. So let me give you, so one of my rules is when you're not 100% clear how to explain something, see how Henrik Nyberg has done it and try to find out if he has any visuals that you could steal and reuse. So that's what I've done. So I use this one. I'm guessing some of you have seen this before. So in this picture, in this illustration, the output is the bricks loaded onto the truck, onto the truck. The loading itself is the activity, that's the how. While the outcome is more of a, so what? We loaded the output onto the truck, so how do we turn it into the value? The reason why I think this may not work is that if we were to be able to see the golden bricks, of course we would only go for the golden bricks and only load those. And unfortunately, we can only see that in hindsight. We can only see that once the truck goes and delivers these bricks and they're used for something useful. And only then can we see what was worthwhile, what wasn't, in most cases. But as a simplistic representation, we should be looking for gold, not just loading bricks. Does that make, how much sense does that make? Good enough to continue? So this is where in the room I would know how you would feel, how you're feeling about it. If you're looking at me, if you're yawning, or if you're rolling your eyes.
Continue.
Just get on with it.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Continue. I'm following with you.
Good stuff. So,
Dragan,
sorry?
quick question.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is that I think most people, especially most sophisticated people in business and in life, kind of understand intuitively gold, platinum, diamond, whatever the representation of value is. But I think when we get trapped in these kind of obtuse organizational environments where you've never really sorted out what is most valuable, or what's most valuable is constantly being redefined by the organization's strategy or lack thereof, you get kind of trapped in the dark trying to just latch on to an OKR that you hope is the best fit, and you can get kind of the broadest agreement on it, and then you kind of just set it in stone and go, and you rarely validate that. And so that's what I've experienced. I don't know if that's what anyone else has the last 25 years, but and I found that, and if you're fortunate enough that you have some big program like an ERP program where it's hard to argue with the larger validation behind it, or a new supply chain network or a new plant, then yeah, those are pretty easy to anchor onto. But when you don't have that, everyone's just kind of struggling to link. And then what's worse is modern Performance 360 systems force you to have one of those links in your performance profile. So everyone just spends the whole year kind of sorting out everything to find one to connect to themselves. And it's this vicious cycle in operating model cultures, I found. So anyways,
if I may just chip in here, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think what you're actually describing there fundamentally is organizations that have no sense of purpose. That's why they struggle so deeply to find value, because it's easier, maybe not easy, but easier to find a sense of what value is if you have a core mission and a core vision.
That's right. That's right.
That's my experience.
I scrolled back to the Feature Factory signs that you're working, or you might be working in Feature Factory, and something you were just saying, Aaron, the second one, talking about obsessing with prioritization. We need to get better at prioritizing. And then once you've delivered, you have no idea if it added any value whatsoever. So you're doing no validation at the end of the process, and you're really fretting about and trying to find a better way to prioritize at the beginning of the process. And unless that wraps around and you do validate and you do get the feedback, which we'll get to at some point, there's no point in prioritizing, really. But I'm probably stealing my own thunder now. So, so just a quick definition. So it's a way, it's close to some of the definitions that popped up earlier. Outcome is the way the things turn out. It's the consequence. It's the result. It's what comes out on the other side. And an example, it's an outcome of the vote that counts. Unfortunately, we have experienced that a few times over the last few years, but let's not get there. So let me give you another way of how I look at this, back to the Henrik Nyberg's illustration. So outputs, and few people mentioned this earlier, lead to outcomes, or as I like to say, they enable and/or support the outcomes. So why are you focusing on certain outputs? Because you think they will help you, they will enable you to accomplish outcomes. And there's another way I'm looking at that is, there's three characteristics an output should satisfy in order to lead to a valuable outcome. It should be usable, and more importantly than that, it should be used, and more importantly than that, people using it should find it useful. And these are the things that we very rarely, if ever, measure. And those are the essential things. Unless you know that somebody is using what you have produced and it is being useful to them, unless you're getting that feedback, you are operating in the dark. Okay? Anybody disagrees with that? So here's a question for you then. If that's how it is, which way is it? Is it outcomes over outputs, or is it outputs over outcomes? Because there were some really interesting and thought-provoking conversations on Twitter and elsewhere over the last few months, maybe even years, about this. So outcomes over outputs. Well, Stephen Covey said, start with the end in mind, start with a purpose, start with a vision, therefore start with the outcomes. And I only recently came across the second quote, which is, the biggest waste of time is to do well something that we need not do at all. So this is a story about climbing up the ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall, or barking up the wrong tree. So we should know why it is that we're doing something, right? So therefore, outcomes over outputs. But then some very clever people have been arguing the other way around. And I'm saying anonymous agilist said, in doing the work, we discover the work we should do. But certainly a guy called Dan Vacanti, who's very prominent in the Kanban Kanban environment, has been talking about focusing on outputs. It's really difficult to know the future. It's really difficult to know what is really needed. So instead of spending months and sometimes years trying to define the purpose and value and vision, let's just start doing something. And let's start getting quick feedback on it and changing our course. And eventually we will discover the golden goose. We will discover the golden bricks. So it still could be one way or the other. So the question really is where to start. And that's my second poll that I would like you to do. So if you go back to the same Menti, same code, I will go to the second question, which is what should we start with? Should we start with outputs? Should we start with outcomes? Should we start somewhere else? Or should we start with a drink? You can choose one of these. You can rank them from 1 to 4, whichever way you want. But let's have a go at it. Let's see what people think. I'm hoping the drink will win, but let's see. So you can see the bars changing, right? Good.
Yeah, we can see that, Dragan, yeah.
Thank you. In the bottom right corner, we can see how many people have voted, so we are getting there. Okay, so most people think, unless it changes at the last moment, that we should start with outcomes. Some people think we should start somewhere else. Would a drink be an output or an outcome?
Both.
More of an input, really.
Yeah, it depends on what you are going to drink.
It depends why you're drinking. What problem are you trying to solve? Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So this is my answer. And I told you before, I'm a certified It Depends practitioner. The way you get this certification is you get sorry?
You asked Gita. That's how I got mine.
The examiner asks you a question and you need to answer it depends and you're certified.
Yeah.
Perfect. But actually that's not a particularly useful answer. So there's a better answer. So let me share with you a really simple answer that's based on the definition of done. So I borrowed this from my friend Mike Burrows, who has he says the handy referenceable definition of done. So you're all familiar with definition of done, I take it. This is his definition of done. You're not done until someone's need has been met. So you're not done when you delivered when you finished what you were doing, nor when you delivered what you said you would deliver. That thing will need to be used by somebody to satisfy a need, and that need needs to be satisfied. And only then are you done. So Mike says, start with needs, then you agree on the outcomes, and that's how you get going. So start with needs. The question really is, who are we serving? Who are our customers? And what are their needs? And therefore, what needs are we trying to meet? And that's a really useful place to start. So another way of looking at this is to say, well, what is the impact we want to create? And yet another way to get to this is, my friend Eben will know it's my favorite question from the clean language. What would you like to have happen? And that's from Dave Grove's clean language. Some of you, again, will be familiar with this. So what would you like to have happen? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Now, the people that are more kind of hard-nosed and looking at the value and the elements, the dimensions of value, they would say, well, okay, that impact could have one of the following things. This is something I've taken from the current organization I'm working with. They define the benefits of, they call it the strategic goal. I call it impact here, as you can either grow revenue or reduce cost, or you can grow customer satisfaction or reduce risk, or aim for a combination of these four, but you can never hit all four. So you really should be asking yourself the question, what is the primary benefit that you're aiming for? What is the primary source of value that you're aiming for? And it could be one of these four, or it could be something else. So these are different ways in which you could start your journey. These are different ways in which you can ask yourself the question, what is it I'm trying to do? What is it we as a team or organization are trying to do? Who are we serving? What needs are we meeting? What value are we creating? I'm not sure I have said it explicitly, and I'm not sure I'm saying it explicitly in any of the rest of the slides, so I'll say it now. And that's one of the definitions, that formula that we were looking at and debating earlier. The outputs don't carry the value by themselves. The outcomes carry the value. They're the vehicles of the value. Okay? So once we have clarified amongst ourselves what impact we're trying to create, who we are serving, and what needs are we trying to meet, then we could ask ourselves the next question, which is, what outcomes could help us accomplish that? And here, very often, these desired outcomes are behavior changes that we are looking to create. And this was never as clear to me as when I was working with a charity recently, and two of the people from there, two of the Scrum Masters from the charity are with us on the call. And they had some really, really clear behavior changes that they wanted to enable or support, like the MPs supporting the message, like I don't know if there's any more up-to-date examples, Ruth and Kat, that you are willing to provide. But I don't know, somebody was talking about Priti Patel repeating the message about saving the children, either in Parliament or potentially in any of the public addresses that she was going to do. So what are the things that are currently not happening that we would like to start happening? What are our customers or our stakeholders currently not doing because they cannot do it, that we would like to enable them to do? How could we improve the things that they're currently doing? How could we provide them with something that would reduce the need for them to do something they currently have to do? For example, again, working with a financial institution I'm working for at the moment, how could we reduce the need for them to go to the physical branch by being able to do what they need to do from their mobile phone or from their laptop? How could we help them by making their life easier, more productive, more effective? How could we deliver value to them? So this is the outcomes. Okay. So if we were to be lucky enough to be able to answer that question, and can I emphasize that we're talking about desired outcomes here? What is it that we would like to see? What behavior changes would we like to see? Then the next question is, how could we make that happen? And this is where we start talking about options. So this now are the activities or deliverables or something else. So how could we make these, how could we enable these outcomes? What would you need to do or create to enable these outcomes? So we often call these options. So it's interesting, a lot of people have been talking that product backlog shouldn't be consisting of anything else but options. It's the options, they're not requirements in the product backlog, they're options, they're things that we could do. And some of them may have desired outcomes, some of them may result in what we would like them to result in. One of the things that I have been really keen on over the last 12 to 18 months is something I started calling change story, and then it changed the name to hypothesis, etc., and I'm going to share that with you now. So here's a structure that I'm currently using. So it kind of reminds me of a user story to some extent, which is why I called it a change story. So due to an insight, or due to an experience we had, or due to a hunch, there's a reason why we believe that an option, an activity, and or an output will result in desired outcome. And very, very importantly, we'll know we're successful when these things are true. We'll know when we're successful when we see these things. So these are really indicators of success or metrics. I really, really like indicator of success. So the desired outcomes have to be meaningful, have to be specific as possible, and have to be desirable. But it's the indicators of success that are quantitative and observable, and they are there to help us understand if we're on the right path, if we have achieved what we wanted to achieve. So this is a really handy, really useful way to clarify your thinking and capture it as a hypothesis. And when we have hypotheses, then we can create experiments. So from options, we create experiments. And there's another thing that I overlaid on the top of this, and that's the kind of coaching notion of what, so what, now what. So what are the options? So what is what we hope to achieve, accomplish, enable by doing the options? And then if we know what and so what, then the next question is, what are we going to do now? You can hear thunder behind me. Maybe. So
Oh, we thought that was just for dramatic effect. We thought you were...
Yeah, it came in at the right point. So now we run the experiment, right? Now, the advice here would be don't run an experiment. Run experiments. Run a few of them in parallel, because I was reading something yesterday about coronavirus and the fact that government has completely misinterpreted scientific advice in March. Somebody said stopping large events like Cheltenham horse race, or concerts is not by itself going to stop spreading of the coronavirus in the population. So they decided not to do it. Not at the time. They did it 2 weeks later. Okay? So nobody said it won't help. What the scientists said was, it's not going to stop it by itself. So just running one experiment and trying one thing may give us an inconclusive, well, suboptimal conclusion. So it would be useful to run a number of them and see how they combine and get more kind of richer learning from it. So run experiments. And then you're probably expecting there's going to be another arrow pointing at something, but unfortunately, those experiments are unlikely to take us back to our desired outcomes. They're going to take us to actual outcomes. We may get something that is different. So we wanted this, we chose an option, we ran a bunch of experiments, and we probably got something different. But this is not a bad thing, because then what we do is we compare the desired and the actual outcomes, and that's where the value is. This is where we're going to get some insights from. We thought we would get that, we got this. What does that mean? What is it telling us? And what are we going to do as a result? So this is where outputs over outcomes may work. Let's just start doing something. Let's get some outcome. Let's figure out how that compares with what we would have liked to have got. Let's get some learning and then start cycling. And it's really going through. Keep on pointing with my finger, which you obviously can't see where it's pointing at. It's going through this cycle of insights. Ooh, that's interesting. What do we do next? And what experiment or experiments should we run? And what do we get as a result? This is where the learning starts happening. And this is where hopefully we will start seeing some value coming out of it. So this is what I call the value creation cycle. Now, how much sense does that make?
Well, Dragan, this reminds me a lot Lean Startup cycle.
So this really is what this came from. For me, is Lean Change Management by Jason Little. I seem to remember he had 3 things in the cycle, and I thought, I like 3, but I was missing something, so I ended up creating this. This is a while ago. And then I started kind of learning from it. So I kind of like yes, it is. It's very much like Lean Startup cycle. Except I probably broke the options and experiments into 2 different things.
Yes, correct. This is exactly my thought. Exactly.
Yep. Okay.
Dragan, sorry. So I think, so one of the things with that sort of UX learning cycle is it can validate results and it can lead you to not do anything. Where I see this as opening up more possibilities. I'll take the example of like Subu, who started off with trying to do one thing, ended up with a putty to mend other stuff. It wasn't deliberate discovery, but they discovered stuff because they did stuff. So it wasn't just validating whether an idea was right or wrong. It was part of the discovery process, which led to a different outcome than what they expected.
Which makes me think, Nigel, you made me think of something else to do with experiment. the experiment will really only work if you put it out there, if you involve your customers in the process, because the only real learning will come from them. So doing your experiments in-house will probably just end up confirming what you think you already know. Be brave enough. Who said you are not your customer, get out of the building? Eben, who said that? We quoted it, I forgot who said it.
Gemba.
Say again?
Say Gemba, got out of the office.
Yeah, it's part of Gemba. It's go to the floor, but this is even more. Get out of the building and speak to the real people that you're trying to serve, and find out what they say. Okay, so involve your customers in your experiments. This is the value creation cycle. The learning cycle or the ways of working cycle is identical. And I represent it as these green arrows underneath. It's almost underpins the value creation cycle. You try something, is it going to work for you? You want to change something. You want to reduce the number of meetings. You want to make your meetings shorter. You want to try to do them all via Zoom. You want to try to make them more interactive. That's the option. How will, well, let's try something. Let's have a Beliminal Meetup and see how many people sign up. So that's an experiment. Okay, so actual outcome is people seem to be interested in the things that we would like to share and the ideas that we have. So what's the insight? Run them more frequently maybe, or invite external people to talk, add them, etc., etc. So that's the ways of working that underpins the value that we are creating for our customers, whoever our customers are. But the other thing that I want to point out before we start wrapping up is this is not the end of it, because you mustn't ever get locked into this cycle and keep just going around the insight, options, experiments, outcomes, insights, etc. You need to go back and say, well, hang on. So we wanted these following outcomes. We have generated quite a lot of learnings. Is that still what we desire? Should we change it? Should we refine them? Should we pivot completely? And even from time to time, you should be assessing the customers you're serving and the needs that you're trying to address. So you're going back all the way to impact and saying, is this still valid? Based on the learnings and based on the changes in the environment in which we operate, do we need to assess that as well? So really, with that, I'm thinking we should go into conclusions and questions.
You know, I've got that on somewhere. You would never come up and walk up to a video camera and do that.
Sorry, I didn't get any of that. I do apologize.
Exactly. So why would you come right up to the screen and do that if you thought he was there? Why would you do that? Oh.
She's not on mute.
Yeah, so if you could just mute your microphone, please. Because I think Dragan's getting confused and it may be a question.
Yeah. Tom, I think you can mute her.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought it was a question for us, so that's why I went back. So the conclusions and then questions. So I want to conclude by two quotes. So the first one is from a chap called Dave McClure. And it's kind of painful to be reminded of this sometimes, but you do need to step back and realize that it's not about the stuff you are producing. It's not about your software or solutions or systems or whatever it is that you're doing. It is about the problems the customers are experiencing. And if you're not addressing those real problems in the useful way for them, you will at some point go out of business. So focus on the problems, or recognize the problems and then focus on them. And the second one is back to Mike Burrows. who says, whatever it is that you're doing, make sure that you always know who you're doing it for and why, which is again taking us back to the customers and their needs. So my summary of the key takeaways: we are still using the old language, and I catch myself all the time using the old language of outputs, and I believe it is holding us back. Where do we start? I think we start with the change we want to see, the impact we want to see in the world, we want to make in the world. We start with the people we are serving and with the needs that they have. And then look at the outcomes that we want to create so that we start addressing those needs. We need to be comfortable. We need to somehow get to terms with the fact that we don't know. We don't know where those gold bricks are, otherwise it'd be so easy to go and pick them up. So make our assumptions and then make them explicit, and then create experiments to test those assumptions and learn. And finally, keep revisiting the outcomes and the impacts from time to time, because even if they were correct to start with, even if they were useful to start with, they may have changed. People around us, the environment around us may have changed them. So those are my takeaways. What are your takeaways? So Tom, could you please put us back into the breakout room so that we can have another little chat about what it is that we got out of this, and probably even more importantly, where do we want to go from here, that you were talking about. And also, would anybody have any questions? Interactions?
Yeah, that's the one.
And then if we go to the next one, is the time for questions. So if you feel strongly about something, share it with us, please. If you have a question, throw it out. Just don't keep quiet, please. That makes
So
me
I'm
really
going to throw out what our team ended up talking about, which I guess is sort of a question. So what really resonated with us is doing meaningful work. But then we ended up having a conversation about how often we end up in organisations not knowing sort of what their reason is, what their vision is, what they're actually aiming to do. And we ended up in a conversation about how do you influence that. So there you go. How about a question? How do you influence when people don't seem to know what their vision is, to getting them to think more about outcomes rather than outputs?
So are these people within the team or outside of the team?
Outside of the team. We were talking about senior managers, product managers, things like that.
Would they ever admit not knowing?
Well, they just play you. But so what we ended up talking about was your feature factory slide, and sort of like how often we end up in that world of not knowing why we're doing stuff. And then you ask people, but why are we doing this? And they don't know either.
Somebody I've been working with recently said exactly that. He said, act like a grumpy teenager. Keep asking the question, why? Why are we doing it? There's a better way to phrase it, probably. And when we deliver this, what difference will it make? Or if we don't deliver it, what thing will not happen? It's a tricky one, but again, it's really worthwhile trying to kind of go back to why are we doing all of this? Who are we doing it for? Maybe who are we doing it for is a better question. What else? Does anybody else have a suggestion? So people senior in the organization either don't know themselves or are not very good at communicating clearly what it is that is driving us. Who are we serving and what needs are we addressing? And therefore it's difficult for us as members of the team to link to something bigger. So we just keep on delivering stuff. What should we do?
Well, I think that quite often there's a divide between goals, between higher hierarchical levels. We're usually numbers driven. So there's a desire for growth. We want to be a X billion company in 5 years. That's the growth plan. Whilst that doesn't really resonate with people who are delivering features, I guess. So I think, yes, there is always a plan. There is some desire, and there's on higher hierarchical levels is usually based on the desire to grow and to gain financial assets or power. Mm-hmm. Whereas other people just have more meaningful desires and wanting to create change or making an impact for the people. So I think there is always a question of do the different ideas of what is success align within the company?
So one of the things I used to have in my previous version of this slide, I had a reference to impact mapping that, again, I'm sure that plenty of you have either heard of or even used. So even in case that you are talking about, Sven, so we want to double our revenue in the next 3 years. Then the next question is, okay, if that's the impact that we want to happen, who can help us achieve that? And then the next question after that is, how would their behavior need to change so that they help us achieve it? And then the question after that is, what would we need to provide them with? How do we enable them? How do we enable that behavior change so that those people, so customers, regulators, I don't know, in the case of, say, third sector, government, MPs, media, how do we enable them to change their behavior so that they help us accomplish that goal, that impact? So even if the goals are really hard-nosed financial, you still have to get back to people, because it's not going to happen by itself, right?
Yeah, I kind of get where you come from there, Dragan. I really like Barry O'Reilly's Unlearn, where he talks about to change someone else's behavior, we have to change our own behavior first. And we start off with a goal, but we have to go through a number of small little experiments to see what we can do ourselves to change our own behavior, which might help change others. But we can't do that by simply trying the same thing over and over again and finding it doesn't work. We have to find some new way of doing that, and often that means unlearning how we've done things before. And I think organizations suffer from that. They suffer from the hubris of, this has always worked for us. We know what we're doing, but the difficulty is in understanding and embracing change, and especially change when the outcome that they're after initially, maybe through experiments, isn't actually the outcome that they want at all.
Mm.
One of the things that I've been leveraging, and I don't know how many of you have heard of the Agile Culture Development Matrix. It's pretty nice. It's easy. It's from the Agile Business Consortium, and basically it's a standard level matrix of what type of organization are you, from surviving to stabilizing, secure, thriving to transformational. And of course, when you get to transformational, everything's perfect and no one's there. But all the different behaviors that people need to have that are enablers for success in not just doing Agile, but any type of flexible, mindset shift of change. And so doing that type of assessment and analysis up front, and just being able to really feed that back into the organization, so you can set much more realistic objectives on change. Because I just find organizations kind of come so top down with change. We're blowing up this system, supply chain, everything is blowing up every day of the week. At a certain point, people just you know, nod and go along with it, but that doesn't mean they really embrace it. And if you really understand kind of bottom up where people actually are, you could find those gaps, and you can actually start in some ways to figure out where the strengths are or where there's, you know, weaknesses. And then you can start to really build, you know, almost in some ways alliances around change. So I found that to be fairly effective when you can get obviously the leadership to buy in, but the point is when you can, I found that to work. So I don't know if anyone has an experience in that at all.
So can I just go back to Claire, because we started with her question, and I'm not sure it feels like we went on several tangents. Did that add, how much value did that add to you and to the question you had? But thank you, Sven and Nigel.
Well, actually, I kind of thought Aaron built on it, so which is why I asked, what was that matrix? Sort of like in terms of, I think what you were trying, what I took from what you were saying is it's a way to encourage that conversation to move people on in the discussion. So that's how I took it. So I did think it was connected to the answer. And I think that is, you know, you've got to meet people where they are, and you can't just drag them along to where you need them to be. You need them to move on slightly. And sometimes people who are unwilling to move on quite respond to that nice, oh, it's a staircase, ladder, whatever, that you can see.
Just so going back to your original question, I think you're still in the right to ask. So you're asking us to do these things. How will they help us? How will they help us as an organization? It would be really useful for us, and we would be able to be more effective in delivering those things if you were to work with us to help us understand how they are helping the organization or its customers, or who are they helping. The key here is to ask the question in a way that's not going to put senior people in the tight spots where they're going to start, I don't know, you need to get them to work with you rather than feel attacked, I suppose, or put on the spot, which is why question doesn't particularly work. Any other points or questions? What else? What else would you like to know? What else would you like to discuss? Everybody's on mute.
I'll try.
Hi, Dragan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Does it have to be particular to this topic? Because I just have a burning desire for a question that I've got an answer to. I see that you're an expert in Kanban. Can I ask a question around that?
Well, there's few other experts here as well.
Oh, great.
If you ask a question and we decide that it's not something that relates in any way, shape, or form, we can't make it relate, then we can always pause it and figure out how we can address it in another way.
Sure. Should I shoot the question now?
I don't think.
Should I ask my question now?
Yeah, please.
So basically, because I'm studying for Kanban, and it's not quite clear if a Scrum Master is needed or not, because it's a bit wishy-washy in what I've been reading. It just says maybe, and that's not really a definite answer. So is a Scrum Master needed in Kanban? Yes or no?
I would really like to get...
I think it depends.
Can I open it up to you guys? Let me see what you have to say.
There we go again. Depends, maybe. What is the answer? Yes or no?
So what is the question? Is the question, do you need an equivalent of a Scrum Master in Kanban, or is the question, is understanding Kanban a good set of knowledge to have for a Scrum Master?
No, it's a Scrum Master as a role required within Kanban within Scrum. Is that role needed? Yes or no?
So in Kanban, because I teach Kanban, Kanban doesn't have any official roles. what Kanban will say is you start with what you do now. You might see roles for you might see it referred to as a flow master. Sometimes a more precise term would be maybe a service delivery manager. And then you have a service request manager, but Kanban itself doesn't dictate any roles whatsoever. So Scrum is a framework, and that framework has a series of roles and it has a series of events, and it works in the time box. The Kanban method, which is what I teach in coaching, is a change management method to move you from one place to another. And you start with what you do now. So it's based on a series of principles and underlying 6 practices underlying that. If you're a Scrum Master, understanding Kanban principles and Kanban techniques is immensely useful, whether you're doing Kanban or Scrum, because it will really teach you a lot of the stuff that lies below why a lot of the agile methods work and a lot of the lean principles work. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. Hopefully it goes some way towards answering it.
So basically, the role is not required for Kanban within Scrum.
So in Kanban, there is no role. It'd be up to the
within Scrum, is it needed?
Oh, okay. So Scrum is a deliberately incomplete framework.
Without.
So what I would recommend is inside Scrum, doing at least some Kanban things such as visualizing your work, limiting your work in progress. So at least those 2 elements I would from Kanban I'd highly recommend. I'd probably also recommend visualizing your upstream activities such as your backlog refinement activities, maybe all the way back to ideation, which effectively is getting back towards what Dragan was talking about with his outcomes, because that will go through some form of discovery process most likely. So you could start to expand out the visualization of your workflow from concept to cache, is what we talk about in Kanban. So a much broader value stream, but certainly using Kanban techniques inside Scrum would be highly recommended. Yes.
So
if that's what you are doing, then and you already have a Scrum Master, the need for that role will not just disappear because you're suddenly using elements of Kanban within your team.
Okay, so yes is the answer.
So I would say whatever you have a team that is not perfect, that could do with a facilitator of constant reflection and improvement, you would need a role of the Scrum Master or a similar role.
All right, okay. The Kanban is not quite straightforward because the information online is a bit confusing. It's just wish-washy. It's not direct.
Yeah, so if you really want to get a good idea about what Kanban is, there's a free online book called Kanban Condensed by David Anderson and Andy Carmichael. It's a free download. You'll probably find it on a Kanban University website.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to download that and read that, and that will give you Kanban's a lot more in-depth than a lot of people realise.
It's called
it's in-depth, but the information is not. Even David Vacanti, I hate his book. He's not even clear. It's frustrating reading that book. I think that's the worst book on this planet.
Okay, well, definitely recommend reading. What's it? Kanban Condensed. There's a subtitle. Oh, there you go. So Dragan's put it in the chat.
Thank you.
And it will be on the Kanban University website. If you have a look there, you should be able to download an electronic copy of that book.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, anything else about outputs, outcomes, or do we go for that drink? Sven wanted to say something. Do you still have a thought, or has it escaped?
Well, it escaped, but it came back.
Ah, damn.
So in the breakout room, we were wondering about organizations. Ideally, you would have the financial background and the time background and the knowledge how to do experiments and how to figure out where to fish, right? What is the means how to identify which is a great outcome? what if the organization doesn't have that, right? Maybe they just, the information that they have is very limited and they don't have a lot of resources. Should they just go and try a little bit, a bit like evolution in nature, right? Which doesn't, it is not engineering, genetical engineering, but you know, aberrations in genes happen, and then over all the millions of changes that are happening, somehow one change provides a species or an individual with an advantage, and then that kind of goes over the millions of years, that kind of goes and takes place.
Yeah.
So there's a sense for the power of evolution, but in the modern space, you know, how does it compare?
Well, it depends how many years you have. If you have millions of years, that's a very valid approach. This is where, is it outcomes or outputs? Is it outputs over outcomes, as again Dan Vacanti is saying, or the other way around? There's nothing wrong with starting from somewhere and going around quickly and learning quickly and adjusting. The thing is, there's too many options probably that you may get lost in. So it probably would be worthwhile to say that that hypothesis structure, that we believe that this will result in that, is a useful way to connect the outputs and outcomes. It doesn't kind of matter where you start as long as you have an assumption and then you test that assumption. And if you can do that quickly and adjust quickly, great. It's much better than sitting there for a year or 5 years trying to identify ideal outcomes. So there's no perfect answer. I mean, it depends, although I hate that answer. I was jokingly saying it's an answer to everything. Okay, so quite a few people leaving now.
Thanks a lot, Dragan.
Time's just about up, Dragan. So, was that one last question, Mandy? Sorry.
No, sorry, my apologies. Just saying goodbye.
Okay, no problem at all. So yeah, Dragan, so I think we're just about out of time now anyway. So thank you very much for your talk. We have recorded it. We'll have to, this is the first time we tried recording it, so we'll take a look and see how that is. Hopefully we'll get it up on the Meetup group page. And I think Dragan said he's going to try and share his slides on SlideShare as well. So look out for that over the next couple of days. We'll put that up, so keep an eye on the messages. We've already got another talk lined up by a good friend of ours, Ben Cook, for a couple of weeks, which should be very interactive. So please look out for that announcement over the next couple of days as well for that coming out. So it'll be 2 weeks today, whatever date that is, 29th of June, I think. Okay, so Dragan, just finally say thank you once again. Great talk, and hopefully see everybody on a meetup soon. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers, thank you very much.
Those who stayed till the bitter end.
Thank you.